Hi, it's Jen Kramer, and this is Getting Started with CSS. In this course, I hope to bridge what you've learned from the Frontend Masters Bootcamp into the rest of the Frontend Masters library. In this course, we're going to build a portfolio site. We'll work on each piece independently inside of CodePen, and then we'll assemble the pieces inside of VS Code into a full working web page. I hope you enjoy the course. Let's say that these are our intro styles. So these are going to be styles specific to this intro section of text for the rest of this. And I'm going to start with, generically, on my intro itself, maybe we'll put some padding on the bottom of 10 rem. You won't actually see anything happen here, but it will show up when we start to assemble this into a full web page. This will give us some nice space in between the end of this introduction and before where we go into the next section of the page. We can also add some other styles. So again, for the paragraphs here inside of our intro, we may want the font size to actually be just a touch smaller. We set it to 1.3 rem on the body of the document, but here we want it to be slightly smaller. So I'm going to say it's 1 rem. That'll make all of that text just a tiny little bit smaller. And our line height is 1.5. Okay. Now, some of you may look at that and go, 1.5 what? So this is one of the big mistakes that a lot of people make with line height, and that is that they add some sort of unit of measure along with this. When you add a unit of measure to line height, you've now set line height to be an absolute unit of measure. So if I said, for example, 1.5 rem, you won't see necessarily any visual distinction here with my particular website. But if I blew the text up a little bit more, that line height would be unchanging. When you take the unit of measure off of line height, it's now a proportion. So what I've said here is 1.5 times whatever my font size happens to be. So if I blow my text up in the browser, again, an accessibility type of thing, because I need to have a larger font size to be able to read this page, then the line height will blow up proportionately. If you don't do that, you'll wind up with the text that overlaps on top of itself when you blow up your fonts inside of the web browser. Maybe you've seen that in action before. Okay? So when working with line height, remember it's a proportion and leave off the units of measure. Okay, so let's focus on the name portion of this now, up here on the top. And once again, if we take a look at what we're trying to build here, hi, my name is clearly not that Oxygen sans serif font that we've been working with. So let's change that. And to do that, I need to select this particular paragraph here. And I could do that with something like first child, or I could just add a class to this. So I am going to add a class to this called name, and I'm going to put that on the paragraph itself. So here in my HTML, line 3, my paragraph is now P with a class of name. And then down here in my CSS, I can say intro.name and change my font family. So font family, var, mono. So there's that, hi, my name is, but of course, Jen Kramer is not quite right. All right, now I need to target just the name portion of this, that span tag that I have here. So let's write a class for that as well. So this will be name space span. I don't need to create another class for this. Span is a perfectly good HTML tag. Normally it has a class associated with it, but because I put the class on the paragraph and I only have one span element inside of this, I could write a style just like this. If you feel more comfortable adding a class to the span tag, you could do that too. So here we'll say font family. We'll have to reset it again, var of sans. Okay, and then we need a font size. 4 rem. Okay, make it nice and big. And then we want the color, aqua. Now here comes the fun part. How do we get it on its own line? Do we have any suggestions? How would I get this on its own line? What is span by default? Is it block or is it inline?
Inline.
Inline, right? So if something is inline, it is inline. It is part of that whole paragraph. If we want it on its own line, it should be what? Probably a block, yeah? So to this, we can simply say display block. There, now it's on its own line. And finally, the last thing that I want to do is this, intro H2, font size for rem. There we go. I teach the web nice and big. So the last piece that I want to cover here for our navbar is making it responsive. So right now, our navbar is configured such that it looks the same across all screen dimensions, okay? And I discussed earlier that this has got maybe some issues when it goes to mobile. It would be better off maybe having a hamburger button. I have that covered elsewhere in the Front-End Master's curriculum. We're not going to add it here in this course. But when it gets big, we'd probably like this to all go in one line. And in fact, in our final portfolio website, you see how I've got my name pushed over here to the left. I've got my navigation over here on the right. And when I make this screen smaller, then it rearranges itself at some point in time. So that is what I mean by making it responsive. We're going to change the way this page is laid out when we get to what's called a breakpoint. And we can define that as some screen width on our website. So let me show you how to set that up. So right here, after all of the styles that are here in my style sheet currently, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a media query, which is part of responsive design. I talk a lot about responsive design in my course here at Front-End Masters, which is all about Flexbox and Grid. That will walk you through all of the details of responsive design and how this works. This is a really brief lesson. And the way we're going to set this up is with what's called a media query. And it looks like this, at media, and we're going to say a minimum width of 850 pixels. Why 850? Because extensive testing showed that this was the right point to put this. You can make that number whatever you like. And we're going to put in a couple of brackets, and then inside of this we can put in styles that will become effective only when the window is at least 850 pixels wide. So in other words, 851, 1,000 pixels, 1,200 pixels, and so forth. As that window gets wider, these are the styles that will apply. Because they're later in the document, they're going to override anything that came before. So what I'm going to say here is I'm going to say for my nav, I'm now going to put in a max width of 1,200 pixels. Because let's face it, we have some really big monitors these days, and we could have this navbar get really out of control. We could have my name so far separated from the navbar that it would just be ridiculous. So let's sort of limit that width of that screen, and we're going to say no more than 1,200 pixels wide. And we'll say margin of 0 auto. And as I mentioned before, margin 0 auto will center that very nicely on the page. We may not see a lot of change over here right now, but that'll be important as we get this set up. Now the only other thing I need to do is to take my name and put it back on the same line as my navigation. So the way we got it off of that before is here in this style with the nav li first child, we set the flex basis to 100%, so it took up a full width of a line. Now what I want to do is I want it to take up whatever Flexbox says. So we're going to just reset that here inside of our media query, nav li first child. The flex basis will be auto. Okay, so the 100% is no longer in effect. That will immediately put it back down onto the same line. And here it is centered on the page. I'm also going to turn off that centering. Remember, we text align the words in the center of that particular box. I'm going to turn that off also. Text align left. Okay. Again, you may not see much change here immediately, but it'll be important in just a moment, because the last thing we'll add to this is we're going to say margin -right auto. And that's the magic sauce that will push the logo all the way over to the left and the rest of the nav bar all the way over to the right. So rather than Flexbox without this, what's going on is, let's take that out for a second. What's happening now is the default Flexbox that we already set. We said take everything, center it in the middle of the line. And so the extra space right now that's associated with that line is evenly split between the left and right side, outside of the logo, outside of that last navigation item. By adding the line here, margin right auto, I'm taking all of that space from the outside of my nav bar and I'm putting it in between the first child and the rest of the nav bar. So now, because right now my code pin is over 850 pixels wide, this is the way the nav bar looks. As I make it smaller, see how it changes its layout? So that is as simple as we can make responsive design right there. It just responded to a different screen size in just a couple of CSS styles. The last part here is getting these cells to overlap. So let's go through that now, and then I'm going to have you try it to add the additional projects. Okay, so now we are going to use Grid to get these projects to overlap. So as you see here in our diagram, as you know right now we have two columns, they're next to each other. Somehow we need to get these two things to overlap in space so that we get that very, very cool effect. So the question is, how much overlap do you want? And as you can see from our diagram, we want a little bit of overlap. We don't want an excessive amount because then we'll cover up the picture entirely. We don't want to do that, but we want enough that we go, wow, you got an overlap going on there. How cool is that? All right, so let's go back to revisit what we did here with our grid template columns. So right now we have this split into just two columns on this page. One column we have the image, one column we have our text. But we can have as many columns as we want. If we wanted to have 100 columns on this page, we could do that. It's actually really easy to do with Grid. The syntax, you can do one of two ways. You could either say 1FR, 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 1FR times 100. Just let it keep on going forever. Or you can use the shorthand syntax, which says simply repeat, something like 100, 1FR. So now I have 100 columns. There we go. And my image and my text are assigned to the first two columns. That's what you're seeing there. Not quite what we really had in mind. So I'm actually going to reduce that again just to 10. Let's just work with 10 columns. Now, by default, what Grid will do is it tries very hard to think for you. It's thinking about, well, you've got 10 columns and you have two children. So I'm going to put the first child in the first column and I'll put the second child in the second column. And then I guess you have 8 empty columns. Have a nice day, says CSS Grid. Well, that's not exactly what we had in mind. What we'd really like to have happen is sort of a 40-60 split. We'd like to have the image take up about 4 of those columns, and we'd like to have the text take up about 6 of those columns. Actually, well, a little bit more, right? 7 columns, 8 columns, so that it overlaps that image. And so how are we going to go about doing that and telling Grid what to do? Well, that comes into some additional syntax here. So we've told the article to do this. So now what we'll do is we'll say for the project's image, now we have to tell it what columns to display in. So let me give you the syntax and then I'll explain it to you. So I'm going to say grid column. So grid column 1/6, what does that mean? If you imagine a series of boxes on the page, okay, so here we are on the page. This is line number 1. Outside of everything. The very far left side of the screen, that's line number 1. Line number 2 is happening, let's see, this is the image. So line number 2 is happening in the image. Line 3 is happening in the image. Line 4 is happening in the image. Line 5 is happening in the image. Line 6 is happening right here between the image and the text. So we're sort of counting over. So we count like humans. We don't start with 0, we start with 1. And we're starting over here on the far left side of the screen. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that's where those numbers come from. Let's do the same thing then with our text. And for the text, we'll say our grid column is 5/11. So since we're going 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, right? We're overlapping that center column there. So the image is going to stretch into that one column, and now we have the text stretching into that column. But grid, again, trying to be helpful, but not, puts these now on 2 separate rows because you actually do have an overlap here in the middle, and by default, grid says, oh, you made a mistake. Well, let me help you with that. I'll just put all of that stuff into another row. That's what's happening here. So we have our image, we have our text down here in the second row. So now we need to tell them, no, 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 I want both of those things in the same row. So the way we do that, grid-row 1/2, right? We're going to start at the top of the screen. That's line number 1. Line number 2 is the one after that row. So 1 to 2. And we're going to say that again for the text. Grid row 1/2. You did it. Look at that. They overlap. You've put them all into the same row. You've given it some number of columns. That was me playing around with however many columns might work here. You might find this works just fine with 12 columns, or maybe you can get away with only using like 3 columns or whatever, but we managed to get everything to overlap here, just like that. How cool is that? You didn't believe you could do this at the start of the course, but here you are, you made it happen. And so now as we narrow up the screen here, this is looking pretty good until we get to our breakpoint, and then things stack on top of each other. Okay? But before that, there they are next to each other and looking all right. How amazing is that?